all seem to be standing a little. Sham straightens up a little. Secretariat bobs his head. Still looking. And that deadly dream on the outside in Coley-Taj. Then it's also torsion on the outside. They're coming by us. It's a Coley-Taj getting it. He's moving away by about 2.5 as they pass the stands. Settling into second torsion. Sham has good position, third on the rail. It's another 3 lengths back, deadly dream. And our native, the Secretariat, is last again as they move into the first turn. They're into the turn. A Coley-Taj passes by 2 lengths. Torsion second by a length, and then Sham third. Sham under an easy hold right now. But here comes Secretariat. He's moving fast, and he's going to the outside. He's going for the lead, and it's right now he's looking for it. Ronnie Turcotte sends him alongside a Coley-Taj. Here we have it. A Coley-Taj is the leader. Sham under Secretariat right alongside. Then still further back. Sham not going to the outside in third. Moving to Secretariat, holding it by a length and a half. Here comes Sham second on the outside now. Now Secretariat is here. Sham moving in second, and it looks like a Coley-Taj is now dropping back to the third. Coming off the Coley-Taj and three close. And further way back to Stanley Green. And the third turn to race. Secretariat. Sham is right in the lead. He's touring. He's over the 2 lengths.
That never gets old to me, y'all, ever. I can watch that over and over and over. And Secretariat is last. And then here comes Secretariat. He's making his move, and he's making it now. And then you just start seeing him taking down a competition. And I just focus right on his head as he's just like driving every step. He's starting to pull ahead, pull ahead, pull ahead. And then he never, ever looks back. That was in 1973. Secretariat wins the Triple Crown. That means he wins the 3 big races, the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont Stakes. And in many cases, he started last. He had a bit of a slow start, but he didn't quit. In fact, he drove harder. And then we learned as we were going through this series together that there was some things about him that would have actually counted him out, but they ended up becoming some of his strengths to become the greatest racehorse of all time. He won the Triple Crown in 1973. He broke every record in all 3 of those races, and those records still stand today. He went from worst to first. He went from worst to first, and that's the series that we're in right now in the month of June. Again, I mentioned we took a pause for Father's Day, but what we covered, the first message was worst to first, from a taker to a giver. And we talked about Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was public enemy number 1 because he was a taker. He was a thief. He was very selfish. He was very, very self-centered. He actually used his position of authority and power to rob from the people. You're good. No worries. We ain't worried about a thing. That's right. A prophetic word was coming out straight from the Word of God. So Zacchaeus went from a taker, but then he became a giver. He became generous. He was selfless. He began to pour out everything that he had. He told Jesus, I'm giving it away. I'm giving it away. And that's what we want to be. We don't want to be selfish. We don't want to be self-centered takers trying to take everywhere we are. We want to be givers. We want to be contributors. And that's what happens when Christ comes in and transforms us from being self-centered, always like protecting ourselves. It's all about us, looking out for number 1, to where we can then, because we're covered, we can then begin to pour out. And then we looked at Mary, who went from an outcast to a lead worshiper. In the religious community that she was in the Jewish community, she was an outcast. She was immoral. She got caught in the act of adultery. She had 7 demons that needed to be casted out, all these things. But Christ came in and filled her, met her where she was, filled her up to overflowing, to where all she could do was give the purest worship to the Lord, because she knew that he was her source and that he met her where she was. Today, we're going to cover one of my favorite stories in the Bible, and it's one of my favorite stories because of the transformation. And just to remind y'all, I opened up this series talking about a summer of transformation. And I want to pause right here one moment. We all need transformation. It doesn't matter how long you've been walking with the Lord. It doesn't matter if you're at the lowest point of your life right now. That person needs transformation, but then the person that's been walking with God for 50 years needs transformation as well. The Bible talks about being transformed. Do not copy the behaviors and the customs of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We need to be continually transformed. And what I'm hoping to cover here is to not just build hope that you can be transformed, but to encourage you what transformation looks like. The kind of qualities that we should have as a church, as a believer, as a follower of Christ. Generous, lead worshiper, that pure worship. And today, we're going to talk about a coward turning into a hero in the story of Gideon. This is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, like I told you. The story of Gideon is in the book of Judges, and it spans 3 chapters, chapters 6, 7, and 8. So I'm going to do my best here to condense 3 chapters of story. Can y'all hang in with me? And I'm just going to touch and go through some key scriptures in this story. But I'm going to try to give you a backdrop here. Israel was always in the cycle of rebellion. Then they would hit their bottom. Then they would cry out to the Lord, and the Lord would send a judge to deliver the nation of Israel from their turmoil. And that turmoil was from God to correct and discipline the nation of Israel, to get them right, to get them out of their sin that was going to destroy them and separate them from him forever. So we see here the nation of Israel had rebelled. It began to worship other idols and turn their hearts away from God. And God sends the Midianites to torment them. And these Midianites were so wicked, they were so evil on the Israelite nation that the Israelites would have to hide in the mountains. They created hiding places in the mountains. They had to hide their food. They had to hide their crops. The Midianites would destroy their crops, take their crops. They would take their livestock. They would take their tents. They would just, any day, every day, just raid and invade and hurt and torment the Israelites. And the Israelites were helpless. So we find Gideon. My man is doing just like everybody else. He's hiding. He's trying to survive. And he's doing it at this moment. He's threshing wheat in the bottom of a wine press to hide from the Midianites. And you normally don't thresh wheat in a wine press. You press grapes in a wine press and make wine. But Gideon's here threshing wheat, and an angel of the Lord appears to him and says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Me? He's busy down there trying to hang low, just trying to survive. And the Lord shows up. In Judges 6:14 through 16, it says, "The Lord turned to him and said, 'Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you.' But Lord," Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family." The Lord said to him, "I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you are fighting against one man." Against one man. So Gideon, words aren't enough for Gideon at this point. He's terrified. He's trying to figure out life. He was just trying to survive, and now an angel of the Lord's telling him to go and deliver the nation of Israel. So he runs a series of tests. If you've heard the story before, he put out a fleece before the Lord, and in that fleece, he told the Lord, "I'm going to put this fleece out, And in the morning when I wake up, I want to see all the ground around this fleece wet with dew, but the fleece be dry. So he runs the test. He wakes up in the morning. Sure enough, the fleece is dry. But that wasn't good enough because he was a coward. He was afraid. He was being asked to do something that was way outside of his scope. So he runs the same test, but he says, Lord, this time I'm going to leave the fleece out. I want the fleece to be wet with dew, but all the ground around it to be dry. So he wakes up in the morning, and sure enough, he wrings out a whole bowl full of water out of this fleece, and the ground around it is dry. So he's starting to build up some courage here. And then in Judges 6:34, it says, Then the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon with power. With power. The same Gideon. Now he's clothed with power. He blows the ram's horn as a call to arms, and the men of the clan of Abiezer came to him. So he starts out with an actual army. He gets 32,000 men. He goes from threshing wheat in a wine press to leading an army of 32,000 men. But that wasn't the way God wanted to do it. God said that he would fight, that Gideon would defeat the nation of Midian as if he were fighting against one man. So God then tells Gideon to start weeding these guys out. And there's a series of tests that the Lord runs to weed them down from 32,000 to 300. So now it's Gideon and 300 against the Midianites, who are about 125,000. No, 135,000. So we see this intense battle scene starting to mount. 135,000 and 300. And it's going to be a battle of the ages, 300 versus 135,000. Well, the way this happens is as the Midianites are in their camp, and you can imagine what 135,000 troops look like, spread out, camped out. The 300 men with Gideon kind of get on the outer skirts of their camp in the middle of the night, and the Lord's instructions to them were, at the sound of the trumpet blast, you're going to break this clay jar that's going to have a torch in it, and you're going to shout, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. And that's what they did. In the middle of the night, they broke the torches, they held the torches up, and they shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. And the Lord threw the Midianite army into a panic. They came out, and they start killing themselves. They start killing each other. And it doesn't stop there. Now the Midianites are freaking out. Gideon's got his 300 men. They're all fired up, watching these guys kill themselves. Gideon summons some of the other tribes to come join the 300 and start slaughtering these Midianites. And that's what happens. They begin to slaughter and slaughter and slaughter and chase down these Midianites that have been tormenting them for 7 years. So guess what? 15,000 of the 135,000 get away with their two kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. And Gideon takes off in hot pursuit with his 300, his original 300, and they go after the actual kings of Midian with these 15,000 soldiers who remain. And in their pursuit, they come to a town, and he asks this town for help. He's got 300 men who are weary, who are exhausted from chasing these Midianites down. And he asks them to feed my men, give my men some water. And the town says, no, go catch Zebah and Zalmunna first, then we'll feed you. Gideon didn't like that. Remember, Gideon was threshing wheat in the bottom of the winepress, hiding from the Midianites, trying to survive. Now he's chasing down 15,000 men and their kings with his 300 men, and he's getting essentially insulted and made fun of by neighboring towns. You know what he tells them? In Judges 8:7, he says, so Gideon said, after the Lord, keyword, after the Lord gives me victory over Zebah and Zalmunna, I will return and tear your flesh with the thorns and the briars from the wilderness. And they continue in pursuit of Zebah and Zalmunna. They come to the next town. Same response. He asks for help. I need water. I need food for my men. The town says the same thing. You know what he tells them? In Judges 8:9. So he tells the people of Peniel, after I return in victory, I will tear this tower down. And then he continues his pursuit with his 300 men, chasing down Zebah and Zalmunna and their 15,000 warriors. And he surprises them. They catch up to him. They surprise them. They capture them. And then he kills the two kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. And then he returns to these two towns and did exactly what he promised. He tore down the tower of Peniel, and he treated the 70 leaders of that other nation a lesson with thorns and briars from the wilderness, and tore their flesh with those thorns and briars. Gideon transformed. In Judges 8:22, we have victory. Then the Israelites said to Gideon, be our ruler. You and your son and your grandson, be our rulers. Will be our rulers, for you have rescued us from Midian. The Lord said, I am sending you. The Lord approached him and said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Gideon's like, who, me? Yes, you. Couldn't be. Then who? I am sending you. You're going to chase these fools down, and you're going to defeat them as if you were fighting against one man. And that's exactly what happened. And we see a transformation. This is the kind of transformation that I'm talking about too. Gideon went from a coward to a hero. He went from the least of the least to be our ruler. Your son and your grandsons, be our ruler. So I want to look at the progression here of Gideon, and I want to see how we can apply this to our life and how God transformed Gideon from a coward to a hero. I want to go through this progression in three parts. The first is we're going to talk about the coward. We're going to talk about Gideon as the least of the least, hiding, threshing wheat, trying to survive. That's all he was trying to do, is survive. He said, pardon me, my Lord, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Gideon thought very little of himself. Very little of himself. In a sense, he had a poverty mentality, a poverty spirit like, this is who I am. I'm little. He didn't just say, I'm from the weakest clan. He said, I'm the least in my clan. He actually viewed in the community that he was a part of that he was the smallest, most insignificant, weakest part of that whole group of people. He thought very little of himself. And we do this. It's very prevalent today where many people walk around with a poverty spirit, a poverty mentality that this is just who I am. This is what I deserve. I'll never get better than this. I don't deserve better than this. I'm insignificant. I'm of little value, and nobody cares. And I'll never change. I'll never be able to get out of this. Those people that have things going for them, they just are lucky, or they're just better, and I'm just not. And with that kind of mentality, it will always hold you down because it prevents you from believing. It prevents you from seeing. It prevents you from doing because you don't believe that you can. You don't believe that you deserve. So you stay low, you stay down with that poverty mentality. Another thing that we see about the coward of Gideon was incredible fear. And he wasn't alone. It was a whole nation of Israel that was living in fear. You know, everybody deals with fear. Everybody. And to a degree, we all deal with a poverty spirit. We all feel like we'll reach a certain point, but then no more. Like, I could never be that, or I could never do that. But fear is very similar. We have different thresholds of fear. We're in different walks of life. We have different experiences. We're at different points of our journey. But we all have something ahead of us or around us that we feel fear about. But we need to examine these areas of fear. First of all, is it an unreasonable fear? If it's an unreasonable fear, like there's healthy fears out there too. You know, a fear of heights isn't all bad. It might keep you from getting too close to the edge of the cliff that you shouldn't be by and save your life. That's a healthy fear. But there's some unreasonable fears, like talking to somebody, approaching somebody about something, or trying a new thing, or applying for a new job, maybe changing your career, or who knows. There's unhealthy fears that just keep us bottled up and hemmed up from stepping out. Ask yourself this: is the thing that I'm afraid of, is it a good thing? You know, speaking in public is a terrifying event to most people. I was one of them. The Lord has helped me a lot. I used to not be able to talk in front of my 8th grade class. There was 12 of us, and I couldn't do it. I wasn't doing it. It ain't happening. But it's a good thing to be able to talk in front of people. Wouldn't you agree? You wouldn't say, no, I'm afraid to do it, and that's bad anyway. Nobody should want to do that. That's not true. It's a good thing. How about this? Is God calling you to do it? Some things that we're afraid of, if we'll ask ourselves and ask God, is this what you're calling me to? If God could snap his fingers and have his perfect way in your life, what would it look like? And is that what you're afraid of? For some of us, it might just be the fear of commitment. That's a huge fear for a lot of people. It's like, there's no turning back. If I do this, I can never go back. I'm cutting the strings. I'm leaving my past. I'm leaving relationships, or I'm stepping into new relationships. Or is it what God's calling you to do? Maybe on the other side of that commitment is what God is calling us to do. So once we've discerned where this fear is coming from, whether or not it's a good fear, then we need to commit that fear isn't going to dictate how we live our life. You know why? Because the devil uses fear to dictate your life. The devil will use fear to keep you from doing what God has called you to do. The devil will use fear to keep you from a good thing. The devil will trap you and bind you up and tie you up and nail you down with unreasonable fears to keep you from moving forward in the will of God. So that was Gideon, the coward. He had plenty of that fear and that poverty spirit that was trying to keep him at the bottom of that wine press threshing wheat. And the Lord came to call him out of that. This is what we're looking at next. This is the encounter with the Lord. He said, go with the strength you have. God doesn't need what you don't have. Good news. I feel like every one of these messages, when God meets you where you are and Jesus meets them where they are, the news just keeps getting better and better. Because you don't have to be all that in a bag of chips for God to move in your life. Good news. Go, Gideon, go with the strength you have. But I'm the least of the least of the least of the... Okay, go with the strength you have. Well, I can do that. Anybody can do that. You can go with the strength that you have. You don't have to wait to get strength you don't have to go. Remember, he met Zacchaeus where he was. He said, Zacchaeus, you come down. I'm going to your house today. He met Mary where she was when her accusers were about to stone her to death. He said, where are your accusers? After he dispersed them all. He transformed Gideon by meeting Gideon where he was, hiding, afraid, trying to survive. In Judges 6:34, it says, then the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon with power. The way this works is through our faith, we take our eyes off of the strength that we have. We take our eyes off of the circumstances that surround us, and we fix them squarely on the Lord. once Gideon had all of his boxes checked with the fleece and all of that, he had to fix his eyes on the Lord. A few weeks ago when I was talking about Zacchaeus, we talked about horse blinders, how those racehorses have these masks on their head with these cups behind their eyes to help keep them focused on what's ahead. Because, with their peripheral vision and whatnot, if they see too much, they're not going to run as effectively and as fast as they can. It's the same way with us. When God encounters you and he says, go with the strength you have, you need to put those horse blinders on. You need to block out all the noise. You need to block out your frailties, your weaknesses, all the what ifs and all the excuses of why you can't and you never will and I don't deserve it. And all the noise around you, like my car doesn't work and I don't have a good job and I don't have these skills and my family's a mess and everything's terrible. You got to put those horse blinders on. And you need to fix your eyes on the one who said, go with the strength you have. And remember, everybody can do that. Everybody can go with the strength that you have. Remember, Jesus meets them where they are. You don't have to muster up a bunch of strength, and you don't have to get yourself all together to go, to come to him. He meets you where you are, and then he clothes you with his power. He clothes you with his grace, even to overcome sin. But that was one thing for me personally in 2006. My heart ached. It began to ache in the pit of despair that I was in. My heart ached to be right with God. My heart ached to be out of this life of destruction that I had created. But I didn't believe that I could get free from that. I felt like I had dug myself in a pit too deep. I felt like I built walls around me that were going to keep me trapped in my sin, in my life of destruction. But I had this hope and desperation, really, like I don't have any. I can either just stay where I am or I can grab this hand that's reached down to me. And I was like, well, I know I got to at least take his hand. I got to at least let him in. And then we can worry about all the rest later. And he showed me that. Like the most important thing I could do was just let him in. And then he clothed me with power, and he began to set me free from all of all that garbage that was holding me down. And it happened fast. Like that word came forth. He doesn't need time. He started to set me free of things. I know that there's a myriad of things that we could be trapped in and piles of garbage from this world and sin that can just be heaped on top of us. Addictions and relationships and shortcomings, like weaknesses. There's so many things that can hold us down. But just, this is a miracle. When I was down, I was smoking cigarettes for 5 years at that time. And that night, after I gave my life to Christ, and I was like, there's no way out for me. I don't know how to get out of where I am. I was smoking a cigarette, and it dawned on me, like, Jesus doesn't want this for me. And I had just given him my life. And I could sense that he was asking me to give that to him. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into here? Like, I knew I couldn't do it. Like step one, as soon as I pray, you want me to throw out my cigarette? I'm smoking a pack and a half of Marlboro Reds every day. You want me to throw out my cigarette? But my heart was soft. My heart was hungry. My heart was for God to move in my life. This was my old life. This is what had me down. One of many things, but this was one of them. And so it was the first fork in the road. This was the very next morning after the night I had given my life to Christ. The very next morning, it was my first fork in the road. I was like, all right, Lord, as I'm walking up the steps into my FEMA trailer, after Katrina and Katrina Wasteland in Violet, Louisiana, I threw my cigarette out and I said, Lord, you have to take this from me. You know I can't quit. You've watched me try to quit, and every time I failed and started smoking harder than I was before. Now I'm smoking a pack and a half of Marlboros a day. What's next? And so I went into the FEMA trailer. I threw the rest of my cigarettes away. For the rest of the day, I had to keep those cigarettes in the trash can because I'd always go get them, you know. I'd patch something back together. If I tore them up, I'd roll it back up and just get something out of it if I needed to do that. I'm resourceful. So I had to use a little bit of follow through on my commitment to follow Jesus. And for the rest of the day, I kept those cigarettes in a trash can. And you got to believe me, you don't have a choice. The next day, until this day, this was in 2006, 17 whatever years later, I have never craved a cigarette since then. I never smoked or craved a cigarette since the day I threw that last cigarette out. That's a miracle. For any of us that have smoked for any period of time, you know that's a miracle. He clothed me with power. He gave me his grace, but I had to let him in. I had to let him in. Third part here, worst to first, the hero. Gideon, be our ruler. Be our ruler. God moved through Gideon's weakness to save Israel. God picked who he knew. Gideon was probably right when he said, I am the least of the least. And God didn't say it, but he could have said, I know. Why do you think I came and got you? And then he proved it when he took the guys from 32,000 down to 300. And he made that clear. He said, we got to whittle this down because if I let you go out there and beat them with 32,000 men, they're going to think they did it themselves. And we can't have that. So he brought his numbers down all the way to 300. God deliberately used Gideon's weakness, the least of the least, to deliver the nation of Israel. We see this thing about God using weakness all throughout Scripture. In 2 Corinthians 12, 9 through 10, this is the Apostle Paul. Each time he said, my grace is all you need. Remember, my grace is divine empowerment. My grace is all you need. To preface this, Paul was asking for a thorn of his side to be removed. He asked God 3 times. We don't know exactly what it was. It doesn't matter. It was something that Paul did not want in his life anymore. It was beyond what he could bear. And he's begging God to remove it. And God tells him, my grace, my divine empowerment is all you need. He says, my power works best in weakness. And here's Paul. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. And we've heard this one. For when I am weak, then I am strong. When I am weak, then I am strong. Paul wanted his weakness removed. Nobody wants weakness, but it's that same weakness that's necessary for God's strength to come through. The 300, the weakness compared to 32,000, was necessary for God's strength to come through. When I am weak, then I am strong. When I am weak, then I am strong. Don Trell, if you don't mind playing a little music. He was already on it. Look at that dude. He was ready. Sorry. I'm praying that this truth would be seized by people in this room this morning. This truth, along with these other truths that we're talking about, can radically transform your life if you'll let it. When you are weak, then you are strong. We've been doing this NASH project on Saturday mornings here in the Metairie campus with all 3 campuses at 6 in the morning on Saturdays, every other Saturday, to develop our men in prayer. And Pastor Chris has been leading us in that, and it's been an incredible blessing. And in that, one of those meetings, he talked about the analogy of a police officer. And he said, when that police officer comes out in traffic, it doesn't matter if there's 1,000 cars on that road coming at him. It doesn't matter if it's a Mack truck or 1,000 Mack trucks. When that officer steps out onto that road and he holds up his hand, that traffic stops. Not because the officer is so powerful and his pistol can take down 1,000 Mack trucks, but because of that badge represents the power that backs him up. You don't have the power, but you got the badge. You don't need the power, you need the badge. Gideon didn't have the power, he had the badge. God has given you the authority with the badge because of that cross to give you access to his power to back you up. It doesn't matter where you feel weak. If you got that badge, you have all the grace that you need. You have all the power that you need. So when we are weak and we use that badge, we are strong. We're weak in ourselves, but it causes us to rely on the badge. We're weak, but the badge makes us strong. Jesus said it, you can ask for anything in my name, and I will do it so that the Son can bring glory to the Father. Don't count yourself out because of your weakness. Don't do that. That is a massive ploy from the devil to get you to quit, to get you not to hope, to get you not to remember that you got a badge that's being offered to you, to get you to stay where you are in fear. Fear of failure, fear of exposure, fear of commitment. That weakness is a defect that all humanity has. Every person has that defect of weakness. But remember last time we talked about Mary? It was her defect, her state as an outcast, as an immoral woman, that caused her to be a lead worshiper. Because she was forgiven much, she loved much. She was able to do the first and second commandments that are equally as important. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, all your might, and to equally love your neighbor as yourself. She was able to love much because she was forgiven much. She went from the worst, needing forgiveness for much, to first because she loved much. In the same way, your weakness can be like a secret weapon that causes God's power to come through, where you can go from the least and the weakest to first and the strongest, not by your might, not by your power, but by his Spirit, through you, through your faith. Your faith is that badge. When that enemy comes against you, when those lies and those fears and that torment comes at you, when those Midianites come at you, you hold the badge up with faith. And that's your badge right there. That's the only thing that you need. He said, my grace is sufficient. That's all you need. Because my power is perfected in your weakness. You can go from worst to first because his power is perfected in your weakness. But Lord, I'm weak. Great.